Welcome to Liberty Sound with your host, Ryan Hill.
There's going to be a new world order out there. We've got to beat it.
And I'm going to nominate Donald Trump for Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. What truly matters is not which party controls our government, but whether our government is controlled by the people.
Welcome to the Drive Home with Liberty Sound. I'm your host, Ryan Hill, on this Tuesday afternoon, which is much cooler than yesterday. We are in pursuit of broadcast excellence in an ever-changing electronic landscape. You can find this show on Podbean, where I'm live broadcasting today, and it'll also be on Podbean as soon as I publish afterwards. Then it goes to Apple, Spotify, and TuneIn, also YouTube and Rumble. Show notes will be in the descriptions on said platforms, and then you can find me and all of my other comments, my text-based comments and projects and all kinds of things on Truth Social as FOA Ryan. Same name on Gab. And then on Telegram, I am FOA Universe. That's my channel name. I also have a channel for Liberty Sound in case you're interested. It has, I just have it there so that I have the name, but I don't post much other than the fact that I have a show that's going on. Coming up today, we're going to talk about the $1 billion Alex Jones settlement that was handed down. Tracking some inflation figures as we get going. I've got a chart if I remember to get to it. And then today, as a matter of fact, Ye was getting into it with Chris Cuomo on his new, not quite so popular show, but it probably got a lot of views today, huh? And later on in the second half, we're going to deal with this question, and it's kind of the main theme or topic of today, and that is what are the greatest threats to liberty today? Got some different thoughts about what that could be, and then I'll give you my take on it. So there's a lot of breaking news today, as usual, being Tuesday. It's after things get going for the week and all the things that happen Monday, plus whatever's going on. You usually find out what's going to be happening by Tuesday, and we do. So just in today via disclose.tv, originally from Bloomberg, Twitter locks employee stock accounts in anticipation of closing a deal with Elon Musk. Telling you, it always happens on these Tuesdays. Seems like this is the third breaking Twitter Elon Musk story I've had going on, but I guess that means it's getting close. Of course, it was finalized as I announced a few weeks ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, and I guess it wasn't truly final because now they're getting ready to finalize it, or I don't even know how these things work. I'm just waiting until it's done, and then we can talk about what happens afterwards. That'll really be interesting. It seems like, they're trying to wait until after the midterms as long as possible. That's what I would do if I was scared for my life that we were about to lose all the power in the House and the Senate due to an incoming red wave, which, we're going to see if it happens. I hope that is what we see, but I can tell you a couple of reasons why that may or may not be the case. Another story breaking today or developing and ongoing is Harvey Weinstein's trial. His legal team is going to argue that the affair that he had with Mrs. Gavin Newsom was consensual, which would be a first that I've heard in the Harvey Weinstein saga that's ongoing. Last week, or maybe it was around Thursday, Friday last week, found out that Mel Gibson was set to testify against him. And I don't know if that's still coming or if that is just, I don't know. I don't know what his part would be in that, but isn't he an interesting character? Who has been ostracized in some ways in Hollywood, even though he's made plenty of successful movies. And I think it's because, he goes off of the beaten path, much like our friend Ye West, who we'll be talking about here in a little bit. So to start us off today, I've got a question that I want to propose and get into and have you think about. I'll think about it. We could talk about it. Feel free to add to the discussion either in the comments section on the live or the comments on the recording. Is our collective health on the decline? And it's really, it's kind of rhetorical at this point. I would think most people agree. In fact, life expectancy has gone down in the last couple of years, at least here in America, probably across the world too. Not by much, but that would still constitute a decline. In fact, 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline or negative GDP growth has often been considered a recession. So I would say 2 or more years of decline of life expectancy would be considered a health decline. Let me give you an example. Here in the States, in the state of Pennsylvania, there is a race for the Senate going on between Fetterman and Dr. Oz. And it's literally a race between a doctor and someone with brain damage. Can the universe serve us up any more tasty coincidences than that? A doctor versus somebody with brain damage. And here's the kicker: it's going to be a cliffhanger. We don't know who's going to win. Um, so I won't talk about this too much, but there was an interview, or I think it was an interview that came out last week where it was discovered Fetterman has been using some kind of language processing system that will convert speech into text that he can read because he's having trouble with auditory processing. And that seems like a big deal. Okay. So we're going to send somebody to the Senate. They could potentially represent our country overseas in delegations and have a big impact on the policies that go forward in our country. And the person can't understand speech due to a stroke that he's had. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Well, let's look at it a little bit deeper. It may be a temporary situation. He had a stroke, and it is unfortunately common, or becoming more common. Maybe common's not the right word, but it is more common than it seems to have used to have been, that people at younger and younger ages are having strokes. I remember as a kid growing up, when I heard about a relative or a friend's relative having a stroke, they were usually pretty old. I mean, in their 60s, 70s, which, no offense to anybody who's at that age and you still feel very young. I'm just saying it wasn't somebody in their 20s typically having strokes. And they can cause permanent damage, long-term damage, paralysis. In fact, that's one of the signs that someone's having a stroke, is one side of their face may droop down or go numb. In fact, you can test, one of the things you can do medically to try to determine if somebody's having a stroke is have them put up both of their hands, left and right, and hold them out at the same level. And if they're having a stroke on one side of their brain, they may not be able to do that with the arm that's associated with that side, or be able to hold it up, could lose strength. And auditory processing is another one of the symptoms. It's also a lingering effect that can happen, and it is apparently happening with Mr. Fetterman. So that should be a slam dunk race, right? I mean, you've got somebody with brain damage. We can't have that. Well, I do want to provide a little bit of perspective on it. And that is that I used to work for someone, or they were my immediate supervisor, with a similar kind of brain damage. Yeah, that's right. They had problems with, instead of hearing words, in their case, it was speaking them. And especially when they became stressed, it was difficult for them to come up with the right words to say. Now, that happens to me, just whenever I'm in a situation that might be stressful, and probably to you as well. But it's like individual words, some random word in a sentence that might be common, might not be a high vocabulary word. It's just they cannot process it because of the brain damage. And I'm just going to tell you that did not make this person any less of a boss because of it. In fact, they were one of the best bosses that I would say I had in my professional working career. And so just the fact that somebody has brain damage, no, I don't think is a disqualifier. And I realize that's an unpopular or uncommon opinion, but when you think about it, it kind of depends on the brain damage. Now, if it meant that he was confined to where he, not even in a wheelchair, there's plenty of people who are physically handicapped that serve in government. The governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, for example, is in a wheelchair. FDR was president of the United States, and others have had physical health ailments, but they were still able to serve. But typically, when somebody can't understand someone speaking to them, that's kind of a big deal. But we're in this weird electronic technological time where in real time, someone with that issue can have words translated to text on the screen for them, and they can see what's being said, even if they can't hear or process with their ears what's being said. I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting. Now, all of this is happening while there was already a race going on. In fact, halfway through this year is when we found out that Fetterman had well, maybe we knew about the stroke, but we didn't know about a tumor or a growth on the back of his neck that he has. So it's kind of developing, but I do think it's taking away from the actual issues of the race. Remember, there are two opposing ideologies on the ballot in Pennsylvania and in every state where you have Republicans running against Democrats. Never mind the fact that some Republicans are moderate Republicans, some Democrats are more progressive than others, but you have an ideological difference between the two parties and between these two candidates. Dr. Oz seems to be very practical in his approach. You might put him in the category of a moderate Republican, but he has a lot of ideas. I think he has some good ideas. I've talked about him on the program before, and we're not talking about those. We're talking about the health of his opponent. So as long as that's what's being talked about, I'm a little bit concerned that could end up costing Dr. Oz the race for the reasons I just stated. Now, on the Republican side of the political spectrum, you may not see that. You may think it's just a slam dunk. Well, this guy is brain dead, right? But think again of the other side of the political spectrum. I don't think it's actually going to dissuade Democratic voters. In fact, it may even encourage them. They tend to go for the person who has been ostracized or bullied or is a minority in some fashion. And definitely, I think there's a minority. Would this be the first U.S. senator, if he's elected, to be serving with brain damage actively? I don't know. Could be. So I don't want to see this lead to a defeat of Dr. Oz, but we're going to wait and see. It's 2 more weeks out now. It'll be on Tuesday. I'm going to pull up the calendar live on the air. Tuesday. I shouldn't have done that, should I? I don't know how to work this calendar. It's a different one. November the 8th. Okay. I want to say November the 3rd because that date is just forever stuck in my mind, but it's November the 8th this year. So it's like 3 weeks out. So moving forward just a little bit, is the Dr. Oz Fetterman situation symptomatic of the overall state of health in America? Physical health, disease, mental illness, relationships, all of it. I would submit to you this, and then we're going to get into some headlines. I would submit that as times get tougher economically, we are going to see, and we are already seeing, an increase in the decline of health in America, mental health and physical. If people can't afford medicines that they need, that's going to cause them to suffer. If they can't afford to eat the healthy foods they want to eat to prevent sickness and disease from forming, economic impacts will make that tougher. And that also strains relationships and makes home life more difficult, because we do know that is basically the number one cause of divorces is money troubles. And that's statistically accurate. So we'll have more on that in a minute. Now let's get into some headlines, or later in the program. That's going to be with the Kanye Cuomo segment and the second half. So jumping into some headlines. As you probably are well aware, Alex Jones was fined nearly $1 billion in the last week. In fact, he was ordered to pay $965 million to families of 8 Sandy Hook victims and an FBI agent who responded to it over his comments that were made on air, of which I have no idea what they even were. All I know is the gist of it is he was saying that it was a false flag, or that it didn't really happen, or I don't know exactly what specifically he said, and it doesn't really matter to me. I just want to know, how is this even possible to be fined $965 million for comments on the air? What precedent is there even for this? I'm thinking of the Nicholas Sandmann lawsuit, which was a few hundred million, and it was settled. And that was against an entire network, not just one person in their show. So not to mention, Alex Jones' net worth has been estimated to be between $135 and $270 million, according to forensic economist Bernard Pettingill, and that's via Newsweek. Who Newsweek at least has the decency to refer to this as the worst school shooting in American history, not the worst shooting period, because we've talked about that before. That was a massacre by the government against Native Americans, not Mandalay Bay. So it's not accurate to call either of those the deadliest shootings in American history. But as terms of school shootings, yes, there you go. And it's very tragic. So the article says that it may be difficult to extract this money out of Jones because, well, he doesn't have it. But that's not necessarily the only reason. Let me jump over to that story. This is from Newsweek. The article says, although the net worth of Jones is not entirely clear, he likely does not have the funds to pay $1 billion. And then it gives the figures I just gave you. It is highly doubtful that the plaintiffs will recover the full amount of this nearly $1 billion judgment, Attorney Joseph H. Lowe IV said in a statement obtained by Newsweek. For one thing, I don't think that Jones has that kind of cash. No kidding. It will be an exercise in holding him accountable and making him feel some pain. The plaintiffs will accomplish that. It just won't happen overnight. That's a sad state of affairs, I think, because we're talking about what's supposed to be the land of the free. And don't even interpret this. I'm not stating support for or opposition to Alex Jones. That would take a whole show to get into my thoughts and feelings on Alex Jones. Seems like he's brought up all the time, though, right? And some of you may listen to me and listen to Alex Jones, and you might like us both, or you might dislike us both. I don't know. You could hate follow us, just as long as you follow. That's all I ask. So he could appeal this decision, and that could be one way. The settlement could be lowered. Hopefully, for his sake, could be reversed entirely. Although I don't really know what his argument would be to negate, the damages that they're seeking, other than free speech. But that seems to be out the window. But he could also declare bankruptcy, or some other scenarios could ensue that would cause this never to be paid out. So it's really just political. When it comes down to it, it is a clarion call to, maybe that's not the right term, but it is a call out to other people with shows like this one, with shows that are much larger in size and reach millions of people, to keep your yapper shut if you're going to say something that's not approved. And especially in terms of some big mass casualty tragic event that occurs. So the next time there is some shooting, such as Mandalay Bay, such as Sandy Hook, such as, Columbine, if you go back that far, and you have a question about the official narrative, you might think twice before you start putting that information out there or your questions out there about it. Now, again, I don't know what exactly Jones said. So before we move on to that, as Chief Nerd pointed out, this fine is more than Purdue was fined for misleading the public and the medical industry on OxyContin addictiveness. And it's for his comments that he made on the air. OxyContin addiction would damage people's lives and has damaged many people's lives. It's kind of what's led up to the fentanyl crisis, because what happens is over time people get more resistant to the same dosage, and they seek stronger medicines. In fact, OxyContin is a synthetic form of opiates. It used to just be codeine, and then we got hydrocodone, and then there's OxyContin, which I don't know if that's the same as hydrocodone. I want to say in terms of strength, it goes OxyContin, then down to hydrocodone, then down to codeine, which would be the natural form that's used in cough syrups and some pain medicines. But the last time I had some dental work done a few years ago, and they gave me, I think it was hydrocodone, and I want to say again, OxyContin is stronger than that. So, what's the priorities in this country? What's the priorities with our judges? And I realize it's not the same judge in both of those cases, but I looked back to fact check this a little bit, and Purdue did pay, or was fined, settled for something like that, $635.5 million, but that was back in 2007. More recently, they've agreed to pay between 3.5 and 6 billion over basically the same thing, misleading doctors, misleading the public on how the addictiveness of these drugs and what they do to actually treat pain. as evidenced by the fact that people get hooked on it and have to keep taking it, or I put have to in air quotes, but because you can always get off of a drug like that. May not be, there's another popular or an unpopular statement for me to make today, but I didn't say it's not going to cause some pain, but I know somebody who got off of heroin, okay, and reformed their life. So it can be done. And yes, there's something to be said about genetics and history of addiction and all that other stuff, but with God, anything is possible, is it not? So let's move on to our next story. This one's a little bit more fun and lighthearted than the last. Rats. That's right, rats in New York City. We're gonna have to add this to our list of things to track. Rats spotted in New York City at a rate uptick of 71% since 2 years ago in the height of COVID. More than 21,000 reports this year. This is from NBC New York. And let's see. Yes, more rat sightings in New York City than ever before, data shows, to the surprise of no one. So NBC New York has a little sense of humor too. They say rats are running rampant in New York City like never before. According to new government data, rat sightings across the city have increased by 71% since this time in 2020. By the end of September, there were more than 21,000 reports. Rat complaints initially spiked in 2021, the New York Daily News reported, with many blaming their population surge on the outdoor dining structures that had been built amid the pandemic. There's your pandemic connection. But even as some restaurants have reeled in their outdoor dining sheds with their nice plastic covers so that you don't get the COVID germs and the Omicron germs on you, the problem with the vermin has not gone away. In fact, many city residents would agree it's only gotten worse. So, but there's a bright side, don't worry. Over the summer, New York City Council members presented a 5-point rat action plan to solve the issue, which includes rat-proof trash bins. It is expected to pass sometime in October, because we all know that a crisis can be dealt with by the government, so quickly, right? So they're going to wait until sometime in this month to deal with it. This story is actually from October too. It's kind of strange how they write that. But did you know that they don't have rat-proof trash bins in New York City? No one has thought of this before. That's one of the things that's, just it's a thing that just goes with New York City. Remember Pizza Rat? I mean, there's rats in the subways. That's what they do there. They like to hang out. They have a rat immigration problem, I guess, or maybe a rat overpopulation, overbreeding problem due to the environments created apparently by trying to curb COVID, or at least by looking like they were trying to curb COVID. So you mean that had a negative impact other than the one that they told us about? Yep, that's right. Now, moving on from rats, I'm going to give you an update here about Peter Strzok. That's right, Strzok Smirk says that January 6th was worse than 9/11. Kash Patel put this out on Truth yesterday and calls it government gangsters. Peter Strzok said tonight, or last night, or the night before, I don't know, on Fake News Mafia Central, MSDNC, that 9/11 is nothing compared to January 6th. And he adds, what a disgraced piece of human excrement. From the guy that slept his way around the FBI while orchestrating the largest criminal conspiracy in U.S. history. This guy destroyed the counter intel division at the FBI, and Chris Wray was in on it. Thank you, Cash, for pointing that out. So, yeah, this guy has the nerve with his Strzok Smirk to tell us that January the 6th was worse than 9/11, when thousands of people were killed in a single attack on our country. On January the 6th, were thousands of people killed or even injured? I know of one death, and then there were other deaths there's the Capitol Police officer who's later, or even really at the time, if you paid attention, his death was not related to the events that occurred that day. He had some kind of a health condition and unfortunately passed away, but it wasn't because of the incursion on the Capitol. There were definitely some things that happened that day, which I've pointed out plenty of times, that anybody breaking windows, climbing scaffolding, and doing anything outside of what you would normally be allowed to do in the U.S. Capitol, hey, they ought to be prosecuted and given due process as our Constitution provides. And if they're not, really, that's the insurrection, when our Constitution is not being upheld and they're not being given due process. So I don't know. That gets under my skin a little bit when people continue to advance that narrative and attack the good people who went there. Just like, in Charlottesville, when Trump made the comment about the fine people, he was talking. Do you realize in Charlottesville there were fine people, quote unquote, who obtained a permit to protest that day? And if Trump had blasted them, he would literally be blasting people who had every right to be there and exercise their free speech and even had a permit to occupy the area. And I think that Black Lives Matter also had a permit, if I remember correctly. And unfortunately, matters escalated, especially in one crowded area. And a guy took off in his car and ended up running over and killing someone who was there. It was a white guy, and I don't even know if the person that was killed was black or white. It doesn't matter to me. It was tragic. Shouldn't have happened. I think I've also seen some video that might indicate why that person felt the need to drive off that way. And unfortunately, I don't think that situation was litigated properly either. So let's move on from this one and talk about another topic that we like to follow on here, which is the inflation and economic situation in our country. According to a report that has just come out, and Fox News covered it, the average 401k balance in this country has shrunk from an average of all people with 401ks of about 135,000 down to 101,000 in 2022 alone, which is greater than a 25% loss. We go to soundbite number 167 and listen to that news.
Since President Biden took office, monthly savings have collapsed, falling 83%. The average 401k plan had over $135,000 at the start of this year. Today, those assets have shrunk on average to about $101,000. In other words, the average 401k plan is down about $34,000, more than 25% in less than 1 year.
So that's about 25%, and which is pretty close to what the overall stock market has done. And keep in mind, most 401ks are managed in funds that tend to follow the stock market. You can get them that have automatic changes, so as you get closer to retirement, it automatically puts you in more conservative funds. But even those, from what I think I've seen this year, even the conservative funds like bonds have been seeing lower yields. So normally that's what protects you against the market losses. And even if your balance stays the same, you're still getting dividends. You're still getting interest paid to you. On the flip side, where you pay interest in a loan, if you have a bond, you are paid dividends. Or if you have savings account with any kind of appreciable rate. Let me look over. I didn't attach these to my notes, but I've got I've got it right here. So the inflation under the Biden administration, starting in January 2021, which we just talked about, began at the 1.4% level. And I'm looking at a chart that you can't see, but once I get video going, I'll be able to throw things like this on the screen. It went up quickly by May of that year to 5%. And it's only gone up since. It just barely ticked down from 5.4 to 5.3. Then it went up to 6.2 at the beginning of this year, 7.5, all the way to a peak in June of this year at 9.1%. And the most recent number that has been released from the official U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics was 8.2% in September. So I don't expect that to really be dropping anytime soon, because we still have high gas prices. We still have supply shortages here and there. Now, some factors in the economy have started to come down. I've mentioned the price of wood and lumber and other construction costs have come down a little bit, but part of that is because the housing market cooled off. And the housing market's cooling off in part due to the raised rates the Fed is giving. And by the way, the Fed is still going to be raising rates, at least that's their track right now, from what it is already. So you get ready for 10% mortgage rates and probably even higher car loan rates. I don't even know what those are right now. Another chart that I found, I think this is a Republican released, RNC released chart, shows the same time frame. Biden takes office in January 2021. In May of that year, when we got to that 5% level, then White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said it's temporary. It's transitory inflation. And it did level off somewhat for the next few months, but it didn't go down. Okay. Janet Yellen, Fed chair, said it's transitory in July of that year. And by the end of August, Psaki declared that it's decelerating. And since that time, it has only gone up. It's no wonder she wanted to get out of that position. I wouldn't want to be there. And I wasn't even a Jen Psaki fan, but she has, I think, become more of a Democrat of reason in the more recent times since she's been out of there. Maybe she's got to run for office or some show that she wants to have. I don't know. And it doesn't really matter. Then the next month, or by end of September of 2021, Biden was blaming the price increases on big meat. Somebody else said it's just a high class problem. Yeah, that's right. People with 401ks, all those high class people that want to retire someday. Yeah, it's just their problem, right? So nobody else. I mean, I suppose if you don't have any money in the market, then the market decline that we're seeing in the midst of inflation is not a problem. But, that's just where we're at. So Psaki was still there at the end of last year and said COVID is the root cause. And at the end of 2021, can you believe that? They're still talking about COVID. We're still having strains. I don't know if you heard about the 80% kill strain that has been developed inside our own country. So much for Wuhan, so much for blaming China for gain of function. We've done it right here in the United States, and I don't hear anybody talking about that. I have to come back and maybe do a segment just on that alone, but I'll have to do some more research. Then at the end of or the middle of this year, Biden said at the beginning of the year that inflation had reached its peak. At that time, it was under 8%. Then in February, he blamed it on the supply chain. And then in March or April, he blamed it on Putin. And that's about where this chart cuts off. But I mean, same time frame. You've heard the inflation numbers. Maybe I can get those pictures somewhere. Oh, I can put it on the image, the cover art for this stream, for this podcast episode, as it will become. I can put a little custom picture on there so you can see what I'm talking about. And it's pretty gross, isn't it? So average 401k balance has shrunk from 135 down to 101 in 2022. I hope that you're not having to retire this year. And, I can't give, I guess I could if I wanted to be fined $1 billion, but I shouldn't give you investment advice. But all I'm just going to say, just in general, is don't panic, okay? Because when you panic, you make bad decisions or you make worse decisions. You make riskier decisions. All of life involves some kind of risk, but when you get panicky with money, that's when we tend to make really dumb mistakes. I've made a few myself, so we all do, but that's just one more reason to not have all your eggs in one basket and diversify, your sources of income. If you rely on investment income, diversify your sources of income. Even if you work a 9-to-5 job, it'd be nice to have something on the side, wouldn't it? Because if your job doesn't work out, you want to still have money coming in because your bills don't go on vacation just because you do. Next up, former President Obama cautions Dems on wokeness of all things, which is pretty interesting. This is an interesting little story here. So let's read from ABC News, where he's cautioning Democratic hopefuls on tracking too far to the left. Out of Washington, former President Barack Obama on Friday warned the Democratic field of White House hopefuls not to veer too far to the left, a move he said would alienate many who would otherwise be open to voting for the party's nominee next year. Though Obama, the article continues, did not mention anyone by name, the message delivered before a room of Democratic donors in Washington was a clear word of caution about the candidacies of Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. The two have called for massive structural changes, and in Sanders' case, revolution that would dramatically alter the role of government in people's lives. the centrist wing of the party, the centrist wing of the party, has warned for months that a far-left nominee could alienate moderate Republicans and independent voters needed to oust President Donald Trump. Which, that's an interesting phrase there. How do you oust President Donald Trump? Are you picking up what I'm throwing down here? How can you oust President Donald Trump? All right. So last paragraph from this article I'll read. The average American doesn't think we have to completely tear down the system and remake it. And I think it's important for us not to lose sight of that, Obama said. There are a lot of persuadable voters, and there are a lot of Democrats out there who just want to see things make sense. They just don't want to see crazy stuff. They want to see things a little more fair. They want to see things a little more just. And how we approach that, I think, will be important. It's really interesting when Barack Obama becomes 44th president, becomes the voice of reason. When, if you recall, when he ran in 2008, he was like the radical progressive. Well, actually, that's not true. Hillary Clinton was the radical progressive. She just couched it in more, Washington speak that made it sound like to most people and most voters that she wasn't. But I think we saw through that, or the Democrat Party saw through that, because she did not win the nomination. And Obama was not really, I don't know that he was the favored candidate at the very beginning. It seems like it looking back on it, but I want to say he had an uphill climb in delegates. He's always been a well-spoken individual, and Republicans that deny that or are blind to that fact, that's why we had 8 years of Obama, because he actually did appeal to a broad spectrum of voters, including some moderate Republicans, including a heck of a lot of Democrats, or Democrats, obviously, but independents is what I meant to say. And he does have this way of at the right time, he's very politically astute. Okay. So you should not take his words lightly, even if you disagree with them. It's important to listen to people that you disagree with to understand what their perspective is and to understand, where that party is coming from. He speaks for a lot. Actually, I would say he speaks for far more people than O'Biden does. Okay. Obama, not O'Biden. So, and I'm not, that's not an ad for Obama. I'm just saying, listen to him. He's saying that this wokeness that's come out of the Democratic Party that they've latched onto, the squad, all this stuff is kind of turning off their voters. And I would say that's true with friends I've had or have who are on, the Democrat voting side of things. They would much rather see an Obama back in the spotlight than what we've got right now, or what we could potentially see with like Kamala Harris. So that's about all I'm going to say about that. Let's see. Well, yeah, that's going to be it. I'm going to go into a break here, and we may end up streaming a little bit longer than usual. I'm getting a little bit more comfortable if we go over the hour. I found out that other podcasters will go an hour and a half sometimes, or 2 hours. Okay. So it can be done. I'm just easing into this. During the break today, I'm going to play a commercial from, I've lost the date. It's like from the 1950s or something. It's an ad for a Frigidaire refrigerator. And I want you, if you pay attention to this, I'm going to get a drink of water in this short break, but listen to all the features that they had in a refrigerator way back when. It's amazing when you think about the new features that are coming out now. And most of them are Wi-Fi features, and your fridge will tell you when the ice tray is full while you're at work by sending your phone a notification. But listen to this, and I'll be back in just a minute.
In your Frigidaire cold pantry, there's a place for all your foods. Fresh and frozen, canned, bottled, and wrapped, new bought and leftover. They're all right there, and they're all at your fingertips. Let's start with the most ingenious door in any refrigerator. It has special places for bottles, spreadable butter, cheeses, even leftovers, and a big picture window hydrator for fruits and vegetables. It tilts down to show you your supply at a glance. And it also lifts out, so you can take it over to the sink when there's a fresh supply to be washed and put away. But that's just the door. Think of all you can store in here on these big firm shelves that roll all the way up to you. so you can get at the food and back without moving anything in front. And how about your frozen things? Oh, yes, there's a place for them, too, in this big, big food freezer. Even your ice cubes have a special place for storage, right here. And watch how they get there. You just take out a tray, turn it over, and push. You get a shower of ice cubes, all frosty dry and ready to use. See all the wonderful ideas in this Frigidaire cold pantry at your own Frigidaire dealer.
Okay, welcome back. Welcome back to Liberty Sound. I am still your host, Ryan Hill, and we're going to move on to some more topics now that we've gotten through those headlines before the break. So first up, we're going to talk about Kanye West, who is now known as Ye or Ye. I always said Ye, and I've said that for a long time because of a comment that he made shortly after his conversion to Christianity a couple years ago. Remember, he came out with that album, Jesus is King. Actually, a pretty good record right there. I don't have a copy of it, but I listened to it on, streaming. I've got a Spotify. I cannot live without my Spotify account because I listen to so much music, but it's so jumbled up and it's, 3 tracks from this and the other. And like most of us do, right? Most people just hit the Pandora or the Google or whatever and put it on a mix and a random. But I like to make my own playlists, and I like to add things and take them out from time to time because I'm so picky about my music. But I actually like to listen to a lot of variety music and then pick out the best ones that are in different categories, all the way from classical through R&B and rap and everything to rock music, pop music, you name it. I just like to, listen to good music. What's wrong with that? Okay, so Ye, as he is now calling himself, and I guess he changed his name at some point. I thought it was a while back, but it's new to most people, I guess. So he was on News Nation with Chris Cuomo. Remember that guy who's been moved or demoted or whatever it is now? And this was just from today. Somebody posted these sound bites or the fuller interview, which I've chopped up into a little bit here. So he's getting talked over by Cuomo, and Ye starts complaining that he's in a hostile environment. But they're talking about the setup is this. With the comments and the publicity stunts that have recently been in the news, which we talked about last week, the White Lives Matter shirt that he and Candace Owens wore, and the interview that he went on with Tucker right afterwards, which is just divine comedy right there. Now he's talking to Chris Cuomo, who is not on the same side of the aisle as Tucker on most things is. Tucker Carlson, of course. That he's on with Cuomo, who you'd think would be more friendly to a guy like this, because you think of Ye is more of a liberal. I mean, I talk about this all the time. I don't think liberal and conservative means anything anymore. In fact, being what used to be liberal is actually what we think of as conservative, but conservative is supposed to be about keeping things from, keeping the established way of things. We're conserving, as opposed to a progressive that wants to incrementally move towards socialism is really what they do. But so you'd think that these guys would be friends, but in this case, what's going on is they're attacking the character of Ye because he's not saying things that are approved of. So we go to soundbite 168, part 1.
Your friends, if they're your friends,
why are you talking over me, bro?
Because I'm trying to correct what you're saying that is
it's not
damaging to decency.
But you can't talk over me. You can't talk over me.
Then stop and give me a chance to make the point that you need to listen to.
Don't cut off. I need to make a clear point. When am I allowed to make a point that you don't cut me off?
You've been talking overwhelmingly during this segment, and I'm happy to give you the time, but
no, you're not. No, you're not.
Well, I can't give you unrestricted license to attack Jewish people and say that they're your friends, because that's anti-Semitic.
So he was kicked off of Instagram for posting comments that were interpreted as anti-Semitic. But his whole point is he's saying he's part Jewish, or he is Jewish, and blacks are. And I don't know if that, I don't know who genealogically that all applies to, but there is some truth to that. If not, it may be the complete truth. Like I said, I'd have to look into it some more. But if you check out the Bible and check out history. It's there. So Ye's point is that he can't be anti-Semitic because he would be anti himself and anti his brothers and sisters if that were the case. But he's pointed out some things that he's talking about in the music industry and elsewhere that seem to be dominated by, maybe it's certain Jews. I don't know the full context. But that's not, you can't say that, right? And I'm probably going to get in trouble just for having said it here if anybody listens to this, right? So, and by the way, it turns out, I think a few more people listen to this show than I was even aware of because I didn't know how to read all the statistics. But back on point, they attack him like he is saying these wild and crazy things, but they won't let him actually speak. Chris Cuomo keeps talking over him and saying, no, you can't say this because it's too radical, because you are saying anti-Semitic things, but they won't even let him get the statement out so that you could hear whether or not you think it is anti-Semitic. Then the conversation moves over to where Cuomo is concerned about Ye's health. Soundbite 169.
Here's my concern for you. When I hear how you talk about your personal life and you put things out there and you get into these looping thoughts of what you believe, it sounds to me like you are sometimes out of control.
Wow. Out of control. Looping thoughts. See, he's doing a character assassination here, and he's trying to say that you shouldn't be taken seriously because you're out of control. Okay, well, what does that mean? Who's supposed to control him? Does he mean self-control? What does he mean? And then Cuomo wants to know if he's healthy. He starts asking him kind of some personal questions, and this is a little bit longer of a bite here, so listen carefully, and then I'm going to review just a bit of it here.
Have you been taking care of your health, and in terms of making sure that you are behaving and thinking at your best?
I love the way you worded it. What you don't realize is when it runs back, people are going to say, wow, have you been making sure you're behaving? If you run that back,
that's not what I'm saying.
You're going to be like, whoa.
That's not what I'm saying. You're trying to cheapen the point. I'm trying to make sure that you're healthy and you're taking care of your health.
Did you work out this morning?
No.
Okay. The thing is, okay, so when do I have a...
But I took my medicine.
But
I took my antidepressant medication that I take every day.
And there you go. So you've got a talk show host who has been downgraded because of probably poor ratings and the image that the network he was on did or did not want to put out there, talking about the fact that he is on antidepressants and takes them every day, but he wants to know if the person he's interviewing is mentally healthy. And I thought it was kind of funny there that Ye says, well, did you work out today? It's like, you're concerned about my health, huh? Did you work out? And I don't know if Kanye did or not, but that's and this is, by the way, not to shame or disparage anyone who is on antidepressants. I may have mentioned this before, but in my teenage years, I was prescribed antidepressants. I had a serious bout with depression. I don't like the medications. I don't think I would ever go that course again. In fact, I really didn't even take them when I had them. I think that depression is more of a spiritual thing, but there's also some genetics that are involved there. It's not as simple as an issue as some would like to make it. But, counseling is important. Having the proper tools, emotional tools to deal with the ups and downs of life, I think is more key than a medicine is just going to cover symptoms. That's really all the pharmaceutical industry does, is it treats symptoms. It doesn't treat causes. And depression is a long-term depression. It's a different kind of animal than, as I heard Bongino talk about in the last week, it's not just, I'm down on my luck and I'm feeling depressed. It's like, and he said he's battled with this throughout his life. And I have in my adult life, until I had what I feel are the tools to get through that and to deal with those ups and downs. I've had some serious low seasons in my life where, just not wanting to really do anything. And that can happen to a lot of people. Some people never seem to deal with it, at least on the outside. So I'm not shaming anybody who's on antidepressants, but it is quite ironic, wouldn't you admit, that somebody who is in that case, and what is that? How many other hosts on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox, or the nightly news are on anti, psychotropic medicines or anti, whatever. Anyways, these medicines that are dealing with different mental conditions, and these are the people that are supposed to be giving us our opinions and telling us what to think. That should be concerning to you. But did you catch that part where Ye comes back at him and says, when you play that back, you're going to hear, people are going to hear that he said, we want to make sure you're behaving. Cuomo says, no, you're mishearing me. You're cheapening the point by saying that. Interesting choice of words. But let's play that back because I want to hear it again.
Have you been taking care of your health? And in terms of making sure that you are behaving and thinking at your best? And in terms of making sure that you are behaving and thinking,
making sure that you are behaving.
Yeah. So who's the racist now, Chris Cuomo? Okay, let's move on. This is unrelated because I got to break up the segments here so we're not just, in heavy all the time. So this is something on the streaming side, on the advice side of things I've been looking at. The longer I go on doing the show, I want to look at people who are successful at what they do and learn the do's and the don'ts of the trade. I still have a lot of technological things to improve on here, but that's why this program is in pursuit of broadcast excellence. That's an ongoing pursuit. And, just as soon as you think you get to the place where it's all squared away, there's going to be some new innovation come along, or the trends will change, the way people consume media changes. And so I try to be prepared for all those things. But here's kind of something that I got that was helpful to me in the last week from a successful video game streamer talking about how pay works in, he might have been talking about Twitch, but he was also covering Patreon, YouTube, and other platforms that give an advertisement split for their streamers. And here's what the principle is. Everything is a time proposition. What is your time worth? If you're listening to this show, well, are you doing something else? You might be on the way home. You might be doing your daily work. You might be done with all that, making dinner. A lot of people will listen to streams while they're making dinner. That's what I typically do, or watch some kind of podcast or show that I wanted to get caught up on while I'm chopping salad. And when you think about it, a streamer is somebody who is creating content. Okay, content is king, and people go looking for content, right? We've covered a lot of articles in here. And every time you do that, you are actually giving up a piece of your time, because in most cases we're not paying for it, we're just accessing it for free. There's also subscription models where you are paid on a regular basis, and that's pretty cool. That actually seems like maybe something I should look into, in a way for people to support. If they like what you do, they pay the subscription just like you pay for Netflix or you pay for anything else that's out there. And when you do that, your time is being exchanged for things like ads, sponsorships, and whatever else is associated with the platform. So it's how much is your time worth? So somebody who streams like Joe Rogan and gets millions of views per episode, well, his time is worth quite a bit. But the individual listeners may contribute, or viewers in his case, may contribute a couple of dollars worth of time, if you can put it that way, for what he's doing. And really, that's kind of how life works, isn't it? No matter what you do, there's really not any, what's the saying? There's no such thing as a free lunch. And when a website is free, you are the product. Okay. When you pay for a website, you're kind of somewhere in between, right? Because you may still get some ads. The website is still benefiting from you because you're paying them, but you're also kind of paying that person directly on the other end. That's the whole concept behind Patreon, or locals is another one. And I know very little about these platforms. I should really look into them some more. Same thing with real estate. Okay, some people call that passive income, but it's not really passive income, because when you do real estate, you have to find a renter. Okay. And that takes time and work and effort. And if you don't personally do it, you're going to pay somebody else to use their time to do it. So it's an interesting way of looking at things. And as I do this stream, I don't know who's going to hear this. As I said a second ago, I've looked into the stats. I've had, hundreds of unique listeners, which was more than I actually thought. I thought it was lower than that. And it's just because of how it counts them. If somebody doesn't listen to the whole thing, and different networks and platforms measure that differently. Well, I've got to look into, am I providing you value? When you listen to this, are you getting a perspective on the news that you couldn't get somewhere else? I like to have that perspective of liberty because I don't really know of a lot of other places that look at things in terms of liberty. They look in terms of political points. They look in terms of just the money, but it's about value. So I hope that this show does provide you some value and give you some things to think about that maybe you hadn't been thinking about had you not heard it. Next topic, an interesting one here too, another lighthearted kind of thing. Scott Adams, the author or creator of Dilbert, who has recently lost some of his newspapers that he had him in. I don't know how many he has left, but he's been doing that for a long time, really. I guess probably my whole life, there have been Dilbert comic strips, and I've read some of them. He says in 2022, one of the things that kids growing up in school have to worry about is their moms being on TikTok and Instagram with revealing shots and revealing postures like that their schoolmates and friends might have run into. Man, that is a weird time that we're living in, isn't it? Like, literally the night that I heard this pointed out by Scott, I saw an ad on some show I was watching that they opened it wasn't about this, but they opened the ad with a joke about a kid's phone background being his mom. And I really don't think they were talking about a family portrait, if you know what I mean. And it was just so nonchalant the way that they said it. It's just matter of fact. And that's where we're at now in 2022. And that's the state of, is it the state of morals? Some would argue that, but maybe it's just the state of technology. Maybe this has always been a thing. What the world's oldest profession is, right? And now we just have computers and cameras and Instas all over the place. So yeah, sorry kids, if you are getting teased by your classmates because of your mom's Instagram pictures or worse. Now let us get to, this is the main topic for today. And I realize it's like an hour into the show, but that's kind of how it would go. If I was doing 2 or 3 hours, I would probably tease the main topic for the first hour and then really get into the meat of it in the second. So here we go. What are the greatest threats to liberty today? I said it wasn't going to be another pandemic, and it isn't. That's not what our greatest threat to liberty, in my opinion, is. But because now it's like it seems like everything is threatening our liberty, at least everything economically. And I'm going to argue here that economic freedom is freedom. So what's the threat to our liberty? Is it a pandemic? Is it lockdowns? Is it these, mayors that are coming in and telling you got to stay home? These governors that are saying you can't go into buildings and you can't go into public places unless you have, a vaccine card or a mask or whatever it is that they come up with next. Well, doesn't really seem to be the case, does it? There are some pockets where that's still going on. So what is it? Is it OPEC? Is it Saudi Arabia? Is it voter suppression? I read some places that looking for other ideas about what are threatening our liberties. Is it identity politics? That's what we thought in 2016. Populism. Remember how all these established Republican thought leaders were telling us that populism and authoritarianism was going to destroy this country. Of course, they were talking about Trump, and they thought populism was going to be the way to get him. I always said the Declaration of Independence is pretty populist, if you ask me. So are you saying that's a bad thing? Okay. And I'm not for pure populism. I think that's dangerous, kind of like democracy. But you should actually have in a representative government, you should have things that the people want is probably the direction that the government should move. That's how it's supposed to work in a Republican form of government. Now, democracy would just be purely, hey, as soon as majority opinion becomes X, we do X. All right. And that's not how a republic works. That's also why the Senate originally had the governors appoint the senators, because if you didn't know that, that's how it was before. I think it's the 17th Amendment was passed. Could be off on the number. But now we directly elect our senators. Well, it used to be a function of the state that you lived in. So the senators were more tied to the interests of that state, and you would elect a governor democratically, but that governor then got to make those appointments. Now, maybe there's some things to be argued that was or was not the best way. I would argue that it makes you more concerned about voting in your own home state and not just show up every 4 years for a presidential election, because that would have more of an impact on what happens to you. So is it populism? What about radical Islam? I mean, when's the last time you've heard about that and the threat of terrorist attacks? We don't hear about ISIS anymore. Thank God for the actions that Trump gave us to decimate them, in his words. But, seriously, we don't talk about ISIS anymore because they've really lost their power. I'm sure there's still groups out there that are reorganizing as we speak, but they kind of had their legs cut out from underneath them. So it's not radical Islam either. Is it police brutality? A couple of years ago, that's what we were all talking about, it seemed. And I do think that there are instances where the police can go too far, although I also argue in that case that it's because of what we're asking them to do. And when we're asking police to go intervene in domestic situations, is that really what police are supposed to be for? Or do we have maybe more important things? Same thing with like low-level drug offenses. Is that what we want our police focused on? Well, some would argue yes. My father would probably argue yes because of the societal rot. But I just think that that's not how you fix the societal rot. Okay, arresting addicts is not going to prevent addiction. It might deter some, but police brutality doesn't really seem to be the forefront. In fact, I didn't add this on the list, but earlier this year, it was abortion rights, right? And now I've even heard today, like, that's not even anywhere on the table. So I will give you my thoughts on this, starting with a quote from a man named Thurgood Marshall, who said, "History teaches that grave threats to liberty often come in times of urgency when constitutional rights seem too extravagant to endure." And we certainly saw that during the COVID years. I guess it was kind of 2+ years that we were really in the COVID mode. And the threat, or the perceived threat, of everybody dying from the curve not being flattened enough, people were willing to give up their rights. But here's what I think really the issue is today. And then I'm going to end this segment with a quote from the Lou Rockwell website, which is kind of an old article, but it hammers in the point. My take is that economic liberty is liberty. Because, for example, remember the barricades around the Capitol for the last inauguration, and how nobody could go to it, and we were still in COVID lockdown mode, or at least that was the excuse. And we had this whole behind closed doors inauguration, which was at least, televised, but very questionable about how that all went down. Well, is that the threat to liberty? I would argue that the economics are more important, because let's look at it this way. If you have money to buy goods for your family, you can put clothes on your kid's back and your own back. You've got gas to put in the tank, and there's barricades around the Capitol. Is your liberty threatened? Well, there are threats to liberty, yes. A government that is not being held accountable to the people, that's bad. Okay. Look at it on the flip side. The barricades come down, but you can't afford gas in your car tank to get to work, and your job's not paying enough to make ends meet, even though it used to, because rent went up or because other expenses went up. You can no longer buy new clothes for your kids to go to school next year, and they're growing, okay? But the barricades are down. In which scenario do you have more liberty? Well, I would argue when your economics are doing better, you have the liberty. And so what we're seeing with inflation, what we're seeing with, energy costs going up, both my electric and natural gas bills are going to go up maybe 10% over the next, permanent, for the foreseeable future. They've both announced their rate increases will probably be somewhere between $15 to $25 a month extra for me. That's on top of gasoline prices going up. That's on top of repair prices being high and all the other things that are going on. Well, that is causing me to restrict travel. In one instance, I have to decide. My family lives in a different state. Well, I can't go every weekend to go see my family. I'm talking about my folks, my parents and my immediate family, not my home, immediate family like my kids. But I have to make a decision. Okay, well, maybe I will just wait until Thanksgiving instead of making a few other trips because it's going to cost more. It's going to cost me hundreds of dollars more to see them. And I'm not even going by airplane. I can only imagine how much more expensive that would be. So economic liberty, in my opinion, is liberty, and everything else that affects you, other than if you literally had a police state where there was, like USSR, where you have checks for papers and everything, that would be a pretty strong threat to liberty. But it's the economics of it that really make the impact, because that's where people make the decisions at home. You will not decide to go do something. You will decide not to go on a vacation or make a trip or start a business when the economics are not right. And that's where we're at right now. So I think that is our biggest threat to liberty in 2022. Now, for another perspective from Lou Rockwell, who has the anti-state, anti-war, and pro-market website, very libertarian in mindset, and I like to read from the perspective there. This is an article from 2007, and it's a transcript or a written form of a talk that Lou gave in 2007 at the Future of Freedom's Foundation Conference on Restoring the Republic, Foreign Affairs, and Civil Liberties. He said, "There are two clear and present dangers to liberty in America. One is known as the left, and the other is known as the right. They are dangerous because they seek to use government to mold society into a form they seek, rather than the form that liberty achieves if society is left on its own. I'm going to assume that the left and the right come to their views sincerely, that their passion for using government is driven by some fear that the absence of government would yield catastrophe. So the burden of my talk, or his talk, today will be to identify and explain the common thread that connects the worldview of the left and the right, and suggest that they are both wrong about the capacity of society, whether it is defined locally or internationally, to manage itself. Let us begin with the question, why should we have confidence in the notion that society can develop on its own, that it contains within itself the capacity for self-management? Another way to ask the question, why do the advocates of Leviathan, as he puts it, believe that the members of society are incapable of achieving cooperative engagement in the absence of the state? The discovery of this capacity for cooperation was the great intellectual contribution of the classical liberal school that gave rise to the American Revolution. It grew out of a belief that whatever imperfections social organization had, there was nothing that centralized government could do to improve it. They took the daring step of tossing off the rule of the state in favor of complete self-government. They didn't fear chaos. They looked forward to liberty. Contrast that with what we've heard about your liberties when you didn't want to deal with whatever the CDC decided was the new COVID policy. You were berated for seeking liberty in those cases. But back in the time that led up to the revolution, they were not afraid of the chaos that came from liberty. They looked forward to it. This event, he continued, was the product of the liberal idea, as held by most all sectors of society. Liberalism did not seek utopia. It sought liberty under the conviction that society had a built-in mechanism that permitted individual members to achieve a harmony of interests. They believed it to be true because they lived it. The belief in this harmony of interest was the great passion of the old liberal intellectuals, of which Thomas Jefferson was a leading exponent. After the revolution, when the government began to regroup and reconsolidate, the liberal idea began to gain detractors. John Adams, whom Jefferson beat in the great presidential election of 1800, never stopped resenting Jefferson's suspicions towards power and opposition to practically everything the federal government wanted to do. It was Jefferson's conviction that liberty yielded social cooperation. It was Adams' view that liberty could only be established and sustained through government authority. These two opposing views persist to this day. And boy, I've got to say, this was 2007. We're talking 15 years ago, or a little bit over 15. And it rings so true even right now, doesn't it? I'll have the link to that article in the description on the podcast version of this, which if you are listening later and it's not Tuesday afternoon, you're on the podcast version of this, and you just need to look down in the description. So that's Lew Rockwell, Two Threats to Liberty. That's his take. My take is about the economic side, but that is so true. You look at, that's what the left used to decry Republicans about, was, oh, you want to control everybody. Well, guess what? The left wants to do that too. They just want to do it in a different way. Now, speaking of the revolution, as I start to wrap up the show today, that reminds me so much, what we just read there, is how much we've forgotten of our own history. I saw a show just last night, I finished it last night, but it had a scene in this 80s movie or 80s show that went back to a Revolutionary War battle. And it was a really low budget film. It's hilarious to watch these B movies. Sometimes I like to watch them because it's just, sometimes they're better than the big budget ones because they're more raw and they have sometimes more truth in them. But the movie wasn't about the war, but it just showed a battle taking place, and you saw the redcoats, and they're all organized and they're all firing properly and wearing the same uniforms. And you can tell it looks like an army. Okay. It was the British Army. It was the greatest in the world at the time. And then you have the Americans on the other side, and some of them are wearing blue, but some had brown, others had maroon coats, and not necessarily consistent equipment or all the different battle pieces you wear for armor and all that. And I just have to think, if I was a kid watching this today, if I was 10 years old or 15, and I saw that, I would think, this low budget movie, they couldn't even afford to get uniforms for the Americans. But actually that was accurate. That was what it looked like. And this movie was made far enough back in our past, about 30 years ago now, that was commonly understood. If you were watching this movie then and you were in your late teens, early 20s, you would have known just intrinsically that, yeah, I mean, the Americans had this ragtag, they were Minutemen, they didn't have the funding, they didn't have necessarily all the supplies, at least not until the French got involved and we had more international support. But how much of our history have we forgotten that even me watching it, I noticed, I was like, well, why aren't they all wearing the same uniform? I was like, oh yeah, that's right, because they didn't have uniforms. I mean, some of them didn't even have shoes. Valley Forge, one of the reasons that it was a deadly winter was they had to go through the snow in their socks and their knickers because that was all that they could afford. Yet this cause of liberty was so important to them that many gave their lives, not even through a bullet or an infection from a battle wound, but just getting to battle. So it's really got me thinking about, and this is one of the main reasons why I started this show. It's called Liberty Sound, after all, was because I see that there is a dearth of knowledge of our own history. I've mentioned a few things about doing family research on my own family and where were we during the revolution and things I never knew about my own family. Pretty cool stuff. Not everybody was in America. Not everybody's family was in America back at that time just because you live here now. One side of my family immigrated in the late 1800s, but the other one has been here since the 1600s. And this is your history and mine. So I want to do more segments in the coming days, or maybe not even a segment. I might do some special broadcast or like the pre-recorded one I did for 4th of July. And I think I will be going through the Thanksgiving story this year and talking about the Pilgrims and their plight and what all they went through to get to this country for their freedoms that they found to be so precious back in that day. So look for that coming up. I may do that as a video. If I really get to it, I can edit some pictures and have some fun with it that way. It'll be a pretty cool thing that you can all share. But other than that, I think that is where we're going to end the program for today. So don't forget, if you like this content, you can follow Liberty Sound on Podbean, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and also YouTube and Rumble. And again, I'm Ryan Hill. I'm FOA Ryan on Truth and Gab, and we'll see you next week. Walk in Liberty. Jazzo. Outro music, Chase by Alexander Nakarada. Royalty-free music used under Creative Commons License 3.0 and 4.0 International. CreativeCommons.org. The Liberty Sound podcast is produced in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Copyright 2022, Ryan Hill and Liberty Sound. All rights reserved.